She wasn't supposed to be part of the fight. No sidearm, no rifle, just a tablet in hand and a quiet post overlooking the range. Her role was simple: observe, report, nothing more. But when the comms went dead and even the veterans began to hesitate, she made a decision no one saw coming. Lieutenant Commander Elise Varn stepped forward, crossing into a stretch of earth where entire fire teams had already fallen. Every move she made counted. Every shot that followed carried weight. Before I reveal how this changed everything, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, which country are you watching from? Now let me take you inside that moment. The wind sweeping over Fob Redstone was dry enough to crack lips, dragging with it the stench of burned fuel and something heavier: failure. The outpost crouched low against the Afghan wasteland, a battered skeleton pretending it still mattered. Its prefab walls were scarred by repairs upon repairs, razor wire patched and rusted. Nothing about it suggested permanence. Beyond the perimeter, sawtooth ridges rose like a row of shattered knives beneath a sky that couldn't decide between smoke and dust. Lieutenant Commander Elise Varn stepped down from the ramp of the transport with a steadiness earned through old injuries and discipline that had fused into her bones. Mid-40s, carrying the plainness of long service, she wore regulation-type brown hair and a uniform. Pressed to code, not parade sharp, but seasoned, boots softened by years of hard ground. One duffel swung on her shoulder, a clipboard clamped under her arm, the thing looking more battle-ready than some soldiers. The rotor wash spun grit into the air, needle-fine particles biting into skin, choking the breath, grinding into every seam of gear. It tasted metallic, like blood in a dry mouth mixed with oil fumes from engines. Run too long in places too hot. Men on the pad turned away, faces buried in crooks of elbows. Elise didn't move. No shield, no duck, just eyes narrowed against the storm, spine straight until the aircraft lifted off and left behind a restless silence. She stared toward the horizon like it was a locked door she already had the key for. Near the fuel point, Chief Marcus Holt leaned on a battered railing, coffee cooling in a dented tin mug, expression flat as the desert around him. 38, body honed hard by years of fights where hesitation equaled death. He carried his rifle at low ready, not because danger was near, but because habit had written it into his muscles. His vest sagged over a shirt stained by sun and sweat. He watched Varn cross the pad, irritation simmering. She didn't move like one of his, didn't carry herself like someone made for this edge of the map, where men vanished between dusk and dawn. "You've got to be kidding me," Holt muttered around the rim of his mug. Beside him, Petty Officer First Class Torres shifted his weight, sharing the same sour look. "They expect us to handhold a logistics rep?" Torres spat into the sand, dry as powder. "Command says she's here to observe operations, evaluate efficiency in hostile terrain." Even saying it out loud made both men glance toward the far eastern ridge. A jagged basin of rock and shadow, carved into the earth, a place they called the Scar. 6 months it had eaten men alive. 3 SEAL units had gone in. Parts of 2 made it back, staggering and bleeding. The rest were bones marked by GPS coordinates nobody spoke of at Chow. Varn approached with a stride that gave nothing away. No rush, no apology. When she stopped, she kept a precise gap. No handshake. Just a nod, professional without softness. "Chief Holt," she said, her tone flat. Polished from years in rooms where the cost of war was reduced to charts and numbers. "That's me," he answered, voice dry. "You're the observer. I'm here to assess operational performance in current conditions." Her eyes flicked once toward the Scar, a glance so slight it could have been a twitch. "I understand the AO presents certain challenges." Torres barked a laugh that wasn't humor. "Challenges. That's one way to dress it up." Holt's look cut him short, sharp as a blade. Then back to her. "Ma'am, with respect, observers don't usually last long enough out here to file a report." Something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not even annoyance. More like the slow click of a lock in an old door. "Then it should be an interesting evaluation," she replied. The sun climbed higher, hammering the outpost until the corrugated roofs shimmered, turning the ground into a mirage of boiling silver. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the morning brief felt like a wake where the coffin hadn't arrived yet. Every wall wore maps, scarred with too many red marks. Each one a ghost no one wanted to speak of. Holt stood at the front, jaw clenched as he traced a laser pointer across the projection of the Scar. Grid Ref 47 Charlie. Natural depression, 800 meters across. Steep slopes on all flanks. No confirmed infrastructure. No visible firing pits. No sign of high-value assets. He hesitated, words sticking like grit in his throat. 3 elements have entered in the past 6 months. Bravo went in first. Lost 4, pulled under heavy contact. Delta followed. 8 inserted, 3 came out. 2 critical, 1 barely walking. He stopped again. Because everyone already knew what Echo's fate had been, Varn sat in the far corner, clipboard resting on her knees, pen scratching in a hand so neat it looked engineered. For 40 minutes she hadn't spoken. No questions, no requests for clarification. But Holt saw her eyes tracking the terrain on the screen, studying each ridgeline like it was telling her secrets. When the intel chief recited casualty figures, her pen hesitated, not with shock, but something quieter. Recognition. When Torres highlighted choke points where men had bled out, she made a quick margin note, subtle as a breath. Easy to miss if you weren't watching her. The enemy's shaping the ground, Holt said, voice like a slow burn. They know the funnels. Force us into kill zones. No obvious sniper nests. No hard structures, just perfect geometry working against us. It's textbook defense without the textbook. He scanned the room. Petty Officer Second Class Jaren. From the comms table, a young tech raised his hand. Chief, what about air cover? An AC-130 could level the grid. Holt's jaw tightened. Denied. ROE requires positive target confirmation. We don't have it. His voice carried the edge of a man forced to fight with one arm bound. And 2 operators are still off comms inside that basin. No strikes until we know their status. The silence that followed pressed like weight on a chest. The missing names belonged to Petty Officer Santos and Petty Officer Wren, last seen with Echo. Their trackers had gone dead 3 days ago. Their final transmission had been a breathless fragment, something moving in the rocks. Close, unseen. For the first time, Varn lifted her eyes from the notes. What's the prevailing wind inside the depression? The question landed like a round cracking stone. Heads turned. Holt blinked. Ma'am? Wind, thermal flow. How does the air move down there? Jaren, the comms specialist, dragged a finger across his tablet, scrolling weather charts. Generally southeast to northwest. Strong updrafts during daylight, reverses after sundown. Thank you, Varn said, adding another clean line to her notes. Her hand moved like clockwork, but the way she asked, like she'd already mapped the answer, left Holt uneasy. Quiet, detached, but calculating. Everyone in that room knew about the letters, the unsent words locked in lockers, the audio files stored under nondescript names, photographs face down on bunks, silent goodbyes, waiting for whoever packed their bags if the desert decided they weren't coming back. Caldwell had taped his note inside his medkit, where someone would find it fast. Torres recorded one for his kids, buried under innocuous file names. Even Holt, who had sworn never to indulge in superstition, had written his mother instructions for scattering his ashes over a ridge he hadn't seen. Yet, ritual, ordinary. As routine as chamber checks. You went forward planning to win, but you packed for silence. Echo's gear was staged in the armory, lined like instruments on a table before surgery. Rifles slick with oil, optics zeroed. Ammo stacked in perfect columns, checked, counted, then checked again. Holt stalked the row like a man searching for ghosts, re-verifying details he'd cleared twice already. Around him, the team worked their kit with a surgeon's focus. Every strap, every buckle calibrated because a single weak stitch could rip open your life. Comms check, 15-minute intervals, Holt ordered, tone flat steel. Nobody breaks visual. No one runs solo. Petty Officer First Class Caldwell, the medic, looked up from his trauma pack. And the observer? She stays on high ground. That's the plan. Holt cut a glance toward the door, waiting for Varn to arrive for the final link-up. She observes, we move. End of discussion. But when Varn stepped through the doorway 10 minutes later, the clipboard was gone. A compact ruck rode her shoulder instead, and her uniform carried the lean practicality of someone who'd spent as much time in the dirt as behind desks. She wasn't dressed for show. She was dressed for survival. Torres noticed first. Ma'am, planning to walk in with us? I'll position where I can see best. Her answer was smooth, offering nothing extra. Not exactly reassuring, Torres muttered. Holt studied her in silence, eyes measuring the shift between the quiet note-taker from the brief and the figure standing in front of him. Now, with respect, the best view isn't the safest. That ridge eats people who think they can outwatch it. Varn held his stare without flinching. Then I'll make sure not to slow you down. It wasn't arrogance, not a boast, just level certainty, and it unsettled him more than bravado would have. You carrying a weapon? He asked. I have what I need. No clarification, no hint of doubt. At 0700, the convoy rolled. 3 vehicles in column, grinding over ground that looked carved by an angry god, rock-torn, scrub clinging like scars. The lead MRAP was pocked with burn marks from 2 IED blasts, but still clawed forward. Behind it, a Humvee groaned under Echo's packed gear, while 2 dirt bikes ghosted the rear, their riders ready to veer off and probe anything suspicious. Varn sat shotgun in the Humvee, ruck at her boots, gaze cutting through the dust haze. She hadn't spoken a word since they left the wire, but Holt clocked the way she scanned the land, bird arcs, wind shifts, the twitch of shadow where the sun angled across stone. She read the terrain like someone who knew missing a single thread could unravel everything. The closer they crept to the scar, the more the chatter bled out of the net. Only clipped calls remained. Position updates, gear checks, time hacks. No jokes, no gripes. The scar made men serious. By the time they hit the ridge overlook, Holt called halt. The vehicles locked into a wedge while boots hit dirt, rifles low, eyes up. Below sprawled the scar, a stone amphitheater hollowed by millennia, serene as a painting and twice as lethal. From here it looked empty. Holt knew better. Observer holds here, he said. Voice edged like command but phrased like courtesy. Check-ins every 15, non-negotiable. Chief, why not push for air? AC-130 could erase that basin in one pass. Holt shook his head, voice clipped. Denied. ROE calls for visual confirmation. No eyes, no strike. His tone carried the weight of a man trained to win but forced to fight shackled. And we've still got 2 operators missing in there. No ordnance until we know where they stand. The room settled into silence, heavy as lead. The names belonged to Petty Officer Santos and Petty Officer Wren. Last seen with Echo. Their signals had gone black 3 days ago. The final transmission, a strained whisper. About movement slipping between the rocks. Close. Watching. For the first time, Varn lifted her eyes from the page. What's the dominant wind flow inside that depression? The question struck like a ricochet. Heads turned. Holt frowned. Ma'am? Air patterns, thermals, how does it breathe down there? At the comms table, Jaren flicked through weather logs. Prevailing southeast to northwest. Updrafts in daylight, reversals after dusk. Noted. Varn wrote with surgical neatness, but the way she asked, like the answer, was already filed in her mind. Left Holt, watching her with new suspicion. Everyone in that room understood the unspoken ritual. Letters folded into socks, voice notes buried in hard drives, photos face down under pillows, silent instructions for whoever handled their effects. Caldwell had left his note taped inside his trauma kit. Torres named his file something that would mean nothing to anyone but his kids. Even Holt, stone-faced, all iron edges, had scribbled lines to his mother about where to scatter his ashes if the scar decided to keep him. It was routine before any push, a gear check of the soul. You plan to come back, but you pack for quiet. Echo's weapons waited in the armory, arrayed like sterile tools for a surgery no one wanted to perform. Rifles gleamed under oil. Ammo counted, stacked, then counted again. Radios pinged and pinged, each time answering. No detail too small to sweat. Holt paced the line, eyes raking over everything twice more. Around him, men fine-tuned buckles and straps, movements tight, deliberate. Because out here, a loose stitch could gut you. Comms check every 15, Holt ordered, tone hard enough to cut steel. No gaps, nobody moves alone, ever. Petty Officer First Class Caldwell, the medic, broke the silence. What about the observer? She stays on the ridge. That's final. Holt's eyes flicked to the doorway, waiting for Varn. She observes. We run the op. End of story. But when she stepped in 10 minutes later, she wasn't carrying a clipboard. A compact ruck slung over one shoulder, boots laced for dirt, not corridors. Same uniform, but her presence carried a new weight, less admin, more operator. Torres saw it first. Ma'am, tell me you're not walking in. I'll hold where I can see everything. Calm, measured, no excess words. Not exactly reassuring, Torres muttered. Holt studied her. Mind balancing 2 versions. The silent note-taker from the briefing and this figure now. With respect, best view isn't best for survival. The scar eats people who think they can outwatch it. Varn met his stare, voice steady as rock. Then I'll do everything not to slow you down. No bravado. Just certainty, and somehow that rattled him more than arrogance would have. You armed? Holt asked. I have what I need. Which was no answer at all. At 0700, the convoy rolled. 3 vehicles pushed across land that looked half finished by creation, stone shattered, scrub clawing for life. trees bent like they'd surrendered long ago. The lead MRAP bore the scars of 2 IED blasts but kept grinding forward. Behind it, a Humvee crammed with Echo's gear and bodies. Shadowing them, 2 dirt bikes ghosted on flanks, ready to dart ahead and probe trouble. Varn rode shotgun in the Humvee, ruck at her boots, gaze locked outward. She hadn't spoken since they'd cleared the wire. But Holt clocked every detail. The way she marked a bird tearing skyward. The slant of dust plumes, the creep of shadows as the sun angled higher. She scanned like someone who understood. One missed thread could rip the whole fabric apart. The closer they came to the scar, the thinner the net chatter ran. No jokes, no curses. Just clipped calls, position checks, grid marks, timestamps. That place had a way of stripping men to silence. When the Overlook Ridge rose in front of them, Holt called halt. Engines choked off, armor locking into a defensive wedge. Boots hit dirt, rifles sweeping arcs. Below sprawled the scar, a jagged amphitheater gouged into the earth, sunlight spilling across its rim like a lie. From here it looked dead still. Holt knew better. Observer stays put, he said, phrasing it almost polite but meaning command. Check-ins every 15, no deviation. Varn shifted into position behind a jagged rock shelf, its rough edges breaking, the wind and granting her an unobstructed view of the basin below. From her pack, she drew a pair of compact optics and began scanning, with the calm precision of someone who understood what mattered and what didn't. On the slope below, Echo Squad performed their final checks, magazines seated, straps cinched tight, helmets adjusted. Each man moved like muscle memory was the only thing holding his nerves in check. They all knew 3 teams had come this way before. Some were still out there, silent, their last known coordinates, destined to become markers in a quiet, military cemetery far from this unforgiving soil. "Let's bring our men home," Chief Marcus Holt said, his voice a low anchor before he led the column down into the scarred earth. Within seconds, the valley swallowed them whole. 15 minutes crawled past before the first transmission. Broke the static, controlled, professional. Echo to Overwatch. Status green, entering AO, no contact. Advancing to primary checkpoint. From her perch, Varn replied steady as stone. Overwatch copies. Maintain schedule. 30 minutes. The next call came through, faint under a wash of distortion, but clear enough. Echo 1 to Overwatch. Checkpoint 1 secure. No visible threats. Proceeding to grid 47, Charlie 2. 45 minutes in, the frequency cracked apart. Then Holt's voice punched through like gravel dragged across metal. Echo to Over, something's... Can't identify... Then nothing. Dead air. Varn cycled through primary, backup, even the emergency band. All she caught was the soft hiss of static, mixing with the wind that whistled along the cliffs. She lowered the handset and swept the valley again. Lenses cutting through heat shimmer and rock shadow. At first, nothing. Just scrub and stone. Then shapes began to surface where they didn't belong. Dark silhouettes melted into the terrain. Bodies flattened so tight against the ground they were almost invisible. Echo Squad was still there, but stilled. Not advancing. Not firing. Not retreating. Just waiting, like men who had read the end of the story and knew how it finished. Through the glass, Varn watched Holt rise in the basin's center, his rifle slack at his side. Around him, Echo's formation broke cover, weapons dangling, their shoulders bent with the weight of inevitability. They were giving themselves up to an enemy she couldn't yet see. She didn't curse. Didn't hesitate. Varn reached for her ruck and drew out what no one expected. Not a data tablet, not a comm kit, but a weapon system stripped for silence. A suppressed marksman rifle, a well-worn harness, and a sidearm that had lived through more than one dark hour. Each magazine locked in place with the rhythm of reflex, her hands moving like a clock wound tight. She didn't call for clearance, didn't announce intent. She just slung her gear, rose from cover, and headed, not down toward the fight, but up, scaling the far ridge that clawed at the sky in jagged stone teeth. A route so hostile it looked unpassable to anyone without a death wish. But Lieutenant Commander Elise Varn had walked worse ground, and she knew the truth that doctrine never teaches. Sometimes the only way to change the fight is to change the field. The eastern ridge of this wound in the earth was a fortress carved by time. Slopes of shifting shale that slid underfoot, blind folds where ambush teams could vanish, and cutbacks that turned every step into a sniper's dream. It was the kind of terrain generals diagrammed on classroom, whiteboards to explain why small units could crush larger ones with position and patience. Varn moved like the land belonged to her, every step placed with surgical care, every breath rationed against exposure. Shadows became her allies, Ridgelines her blinders. Where the rock dipped, she flowed. Where it rose, she clung like part of the stone. She wasn't charging in. She was hunting, slow, deliberate, with the sharp clarity of someone who had already decided how this ended. From her perch earlier, she'd mapped every logical strong point the enemy would claim. Angles, sight lines, interlocking fire zones, they might have the advantage, but they had chosen by rulebook. Elise Varn had stopped following rules a long time ago. The first nest revealed itself behind a serrated barricade of stone, giving perfect overwatch of the basin. She eased forward, closing from above, crawling across scree that shifted treacherously with each inch. One mistake and gravity would announce her presence before a bullet ever could. Peering over, she found him. A single shooter in patterned desert camo, locked in behind a precision rifle aimed squarely at the Americans below. "Commander, can I ask you something straight?" His voice carried over the low drone of the rotor, curious but cautious. She didn't answer right away. Instead, her eyes locked on the horizon, a 1,000-yard stare carved from classified years. Finally, one word left her lips. "Restricted." "Higher than my clearance?" He pressed. "Higher than your comprehension," she returned without blinking. From the back, Torres shifted near the medic kit, gaze narrowing. "You're not really just operations, are you?" Varn didn't flinch. She let silence breathe, the kind that stretched long enough for the mountains to blur past the window. When she spoke at last, it carried the gravity of someone who had walked through rooms that officially didn't exist. "I handled movements. Missions the world pretends never happened. That was it. That was all they were going to get." Because the kind of coordination she meant wasn't about cargo, runs or supply ledgers. It was the sort that could alter a battlefield by removing the problem entirely. Not moving crates, removing threats. The kind that spoke in precision and overwhelming force when there was no other choice. When operators were bleeding out in kill, zones designed to swallow them whole. Sometimes that was the only language left. The report later? Locked so deep it needed 3 flag officers just to glance at the header. Buried under a project code with no mission history. At the top, a single line. Recovery of 2 personnel following severe enemy disruption. No mention of what triggered that sudden retreat. No signature for the ghost who made it happen. Because officially that ghost didn't exist. Lieutenant Commander Elise Varn. Disappeared from forward base. Sentinel before the night cycle ended. Her bunk stripped bare, datapads cleared. Deployment orders slid through the system like a ghost in the wire. By first light, her existence had been erased with surgical precision. Yet inside the tactical hub, tacked to the wall beside blurry drone stills from the ash rift, someone left a single relic. A black patch stitched in muted gray, jagged ridgeline embroidered with one word beneath it. Varn confirmed. No rank, no insignia, no explanation. Just a silent nod to what everyone understood. But no one would speak aloud. Some. Winds couldn't be toasted in any mess hall. Back across the rift, the wind prowled through empty trenches. Crawling over firing positions the enemy abandoned overnight. They didn't retreat because they broke. They retreated because they realized the cost of staying outweighed the ground they held. Because the cruelest trap is the one you set for someone else. And walk into yourself. And sometimes the person you wrote off as a background player turns out to be the one who changes the entire board. Chief Marcus Holt carried that patch until his rotation ended. When Green Squads asked about it, he'd just say, "It belonged to someone who taught me this. Assumptions will bury you faster than any bullet." And when replacements rotated through Sentinel, whispering about how the rift finally cracked, Holt made sure they understood one thing. The deadliest operators aren't always the loudest, they're the shadows. You never factor in. Because Lieutenant Commander Elise Varn proved a truth carved into the bones of warfare. The sharpest weapon is the one the enemy never sees coming. And when everything collapses, when the map bleeds red and hope's just a rumor, sometimes the outcome hinges on one human refusing to accept defeat. Ever had a moment when the person everyone dismissed ended up being the one who turned the entire fight around? What would run through your mind if you saw that quiet operations officer walk straight into a battlefield? No one else dared cross? Here's the real question. How many warriors move among us, masked in ordinary roles, waiting for that one instant to show the world what resolve really means? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story reminded you why silent professionals make history while others are still writing reports, tap that like button and subscribe for more from Black and Wronged. Send this to someone who understands this truth. The most lethal presence in the room is almost always the one you overlook. More stories of unseen legends are on your screen. Right now, click one and keep the fire burning. We'll see you tomorrow with another reminder that appearances lie. Until then, never forget. The wolf doesn't howl before the strike.